The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program, and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Well, hello. Welcome to Spindle City Straight Talk. I'm Chip.
And I'm CJ.
And you'll be watching this on Wednesday, and we will not be live. We're live right now, but we won't be live. I have to go to Boston, unfortunately, and there's a conspiracy that make all my appointments and all these meetings on Wednesday, and we're going to put an end to that very quickly. But we are here, and, we are going to be talking Wednesday's news on Tuesday today.
There you go. And, a couple of quick announcements that are going on. By the time people are seeing this on July 1st, South Coast Media and Educational Foundation will officially be a non-profit educational foundation here. And South Coast Media and Educational Foundation owns and has taken over operations for Troy City Productions and Spindle City Straight Talk. So we are definitely now one in the same. So that should be a great thing. But, again, this is Tuesday where we're recording this, and we went into a meeting yesterday. As you know, Chip, you were there, with the city administrator, Cathy and Viveiros. And the mayor released a press statement today in regards to the closing of the senior center, which was so deep in bull that I didn't even have hip boots large enough to handle it. But we're going to go over some of that, because what we found out yesterday kind of disenfranchises a lot of what the mayor said in his press release today. And I think that the people of Fall River are going to be very upset about it. But just so you know, we're releasing this information before our competitors here in Fall River. And as usual, Straight Talk is on the scene and making this happen. So, Chip, do I want to lead with you, or do we want to lead with anything else? Is there any other?
I think we've got quite a bit to talk about, because there was a very bold statement made in front of the council that she in fact has saved like $21 million over the last 17 months, which would, as usual, we know is absolutely absurd, because why are we broke if she saved $21 million and we still had a $6.5 million deficit in the budget when we went into this budget cycle? So, but we did have a meeting, and I have to extend up my kudos to the city administrator for meeting with us. And she did meet, and we did have a very a very long meeting. We made her work overtime. We were there till after City Hall closed. And we discussed these things at length. And they need even more discussion, but we got a pretty good overall view of some of these things that they're attributing to this savings for. And while we agreed to disagree on philosophy and principle, we can go over some of these things. And I don't know if you have your sheet, CJ, do you?
I have the list with me, yes.
Yeah, so let's, you want to go kind of item by item?
Yeah, we might as well.
For our viewers, yeah, because this is the sheet we got item by item. So item number 1, Fall River Police Department outsourced female. Well, what happens is when a female gets arrested, now they're turning them over to the sheriff's department. However, I'm not really sure about that transition. When that transition is made, until that transition is made, they have to bring a police officer in off the street, a female police officer, to babysit until the sheriff's department picks her up. So I'm not sure. But they set a $250,000 in savings by getting rid of the matrons.
That was 5 matrons, Chip.
5 matrons, yeah.
Yes.
Which
And that's an actual net savings, as you remember, because the city pays $75 per female prisoner transferred to the Ash Street Jail. So it's very interesting to see. But they don't talk about the fact that they had to pay unemployment and et cetera, on the loss. But we'll give the $250,000 net savings.
And that actually, that actually has been on the books a while. And as I said, everything is a double-edged sword. We may say, well, we don't have enough. It is more cost-effective to basically get rid of this. But we have to look at, number one, we had people that lost their jobs, which is, and it gets back to one of my fundamental philosophical differences with the city and this administration expressly, is that all the cuts and all the savings seem to come from the bottom, not from the top. The matrons are some of the lowest paid people in the community, in city government, and maybe that was a good decision. I would have to probably look at that in the scope of how many female prisoners we're going to have, but okay, it's initially they're saying we're saving money.
Well, and also let's look at the fact that the city right now is in negotiations to privatize jail services altogether. And I shouldn't say privatize it, but they're looking at turning it over to the sheriff's office. And that would be male and female prisoners. And again, they're also looking at using our facilities for that. So, so there's going to be a hand washing of each other here, and that could create not only a revenue stream, but also a substantial savings on a person to be in the jails covering that, and that would put more police officers themselves back on the street. So that might be a good thing, it might be a bad thing, we're going to have to look, but that is something they're looking at doing. So
you're right, sounds like a good idea on first blush, but as I said, it's always at the lower end of the spectrum. We're looking at this, but this is putting more police officers on the street, which is always a good idea. But the other problem is, I remember the major problems that lasted for years when they made a centralized dispatch, and they took the fire dispatches and made them civilians, and they went to the police department. They had an extremely difficult time with who they were answerable to in situations. Many of these dispatches felt because they worked in the police department building and because they were supervised by a police sergeant that they did not have to, the fire department had no control over them even when they were acting as fire dispatches. So I just hope the same thing, I hope they learned from that, because I'm not sure having two law enforcement agencies in the same building, there's not going to be issues with who is in charge of what and where one's jurisdiction ends. I hope they settle that before they do this, because it's not a problem that we haven't faced before when you have two different entities operating in the same building.
yeah, well, that's the kind of stuff that happens, but the one thing that we always have to remember, and I think our local law enforcement and many of them don't seem to want to recognize sometimes, is that the highest law enforcement authority in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has been, and shall remain the sheriff. The sheriff of each county is the highest law enforcement authority. And while they've been dismissed or discharged to prisons and courthouses and serving of papers, under the Constitution and under the authority of the state law, they are the highest law enforcement authority in the Commonwealth. So, again, we're going to get into a jurisdictional pissing match, which we seem to have a lot of in Fall River.
Yeah.
But the next savings came from the DCM, the Department of Community Maintenance, in their elimination of the 24-hour watchman. And that saved them $75,000.
Which is another from the bottom thing, and as I said, it's okay, but I mean, to me, they have to be incorporated with some cuts from the top, which
we don't see any of that in this whole meeting. We see no cuts from the top, and as a matter of fact, Cathy Ann said very clearly that our department heads don't even have administrative assistants. And you came,
Well-
you came back very good with, no, they have 3 assistant supervisors. So
That's right. So it's like, that's absurd. I mean,
Right.
that's not the way this structured. But obviously, she's very resistant to any cuts at the top.
Right.
And she said, she firmly believes that we should have 4 or 5 people working in the treasurer's department, even though we're supposed to have a fairly simplistic budget. But again, here we have one job, $75,000 at the bottom. And I'm not, like I said, sounds okay, you eliminated a job. But the fact is, if we're not going to have a watchman at DCM, what happens if they steal $400,000 worth of equipment? Then they go, oh crap, we saved $75,000 by getting rid of the watchman, but now we lost $500,000 worth of equipment. Well, I'm not sure if that's a good deal either. I mean, I hope they put in a security system there. As I said, these things, and also what we have to touch upon, and I think it's extremely important, is that this threat that they held over the city council and the people of Fall River about the loss of this giant number of jobs, we now know that that was not an accurate representation. It was a flat-out lie. Because most of these jobs were jobs that were already gone, they were unfilled.
Right.
The matrons are gone. They have been gone for a while.
Right.
So they counted that as some of the jobs that were going to be axed, when in fact they were not. They already have been axed.
Right. They were axed, but they were still in the budget.
They're still in the budget. Yeah. Well, that's a political convenience argument.
That shows free cash. That shows free cash.
When you eliminate a job, you've eliminated a job through attrition. It's not filled.
Right.
It's not a layoff. You're not laying somebody off physically. That is not accurate. That's political half-truths again. So that number that they attempted to bully and badger, and successfully, I may add, the city council, but not the people. We all knew that number was baloney. And then we move on to the next gigantic savings, Health Department Preventive Care Services, which are the elimination of 1 nurse and discontinuing vaccinations given in the schools. CJ, I'll let you handle this one since you are a PhD in nursing. And you've got more degrees in nursing than a thermometer. So
it's just interesting that they've eliminated preventive services, which means no more vaccines, okay? They have eliminated a nursing position, and actually it was a nursing position and a half, I believe, for a savings of $62,000. So, I mean, these could be classified as necessary services. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But they do also oversee this public health department tuberculosis prevention and treatment. And they have to actually go out and make visits. But the city attempted to enter into negotiations with the South Coast Hospital Group, it's a big mistake, but nonetheless, that's a personal opinion, to take over those services. And South Coast didn't want them. So I suggested maybe they reach out to Stewart and see if they can handle them. The problem I have with this, again, is that, number one, we don't have any recognized public health nurses. That's an actual designation. It's called PHN in the city of Fall River employ. They are hiring nurses, and they're very qualified nurses. And they should be designated as public health nurses, but that requires they take the certification process. But again, we're losing services again. And I asked, what about medical clearance to return to school? Because that department on the 4th floor was doing that. They were doing the school permits because the kids weren't going to the doctor or whatever the case may be. And that should have been fees reimbursed to the city from the school department. But Meg Mayo Brown refused to do that. And while we're doing that, I'm going to skip down real quickly to the elimination of school crossing guards, which saved $182,000. Well, let me tell you something about that, because everyone's blaming the mayor for that, and I don't come out in defense of the mayor ever, or Cathy Ann, as we know. But that was a decision made by Meg Mayo Brown. The school superintendent said, we are not going to pay for that. Well, the city doesn't have to pay for that. The school department does, and they refused to. So Meg Mayo Brown got rid of the school crossing guards. And why? Because they don't meet net school spending. Shame on you, Meg Mayo Brown. You have just shown us that you don't care about the safety or well-being of the students of the city of Fall River. You don't care. You only care about meeting net school spending, which gives your friends and your cronies and your political butt kissers high-paying jobs. And that is wrong.
That was a good segue.
Okay?
We went from nursing to butt kisses. Good. All right. The next
Hey,
one.
let me tell you something. I can take this and do this any way I can. But let's move into now that we've gone to the children's section. Now let's go to the senior section. Okay?
Oh, no, wait a minute.
Okay.
We're at the health department.
Yep.
Okay, so the nurses. We have East End Library branch closing.
Right.
And we'll bundle that in with the South Main Street Senior Center because we have both ends of the spectrum. We have a library that services children and seniors and everybody in between. And the South Main Senior Center, which is in between 5 complexes that house elderly and handicapped people. And the savings between the two are $86,300, $36,300 for the East End branch. Cathy said, well, you know, the East End branch isn't utilized that much, and she used a statistic which you refuted, I believe, CJ, because it was only books that were checked out.
Right. They're only using the checking out of books.
And we have to remind everybody, and as our Friday host, Carlos, who's been here on a regular basis, as you all know, is the president of the Flint Neighborhood Association, which is the east end of the city. And he made it very clear that a lot of people use that library to use computers because they don't own their own computers.
Correct.
And it's utilized in the South End Senior Center. It's more about the rent than the center and about utilization, which was a contradiction to what they said. They talked about low utilization, but in fact, it's how much they were paying for rent. And she did say they're going to try to build one giant senior center, which I think will be when hell freezes over, but that's not going to be. But you know, again, we look at these first 5 items, and they really don't affect. They don't affect the high end of the spectrum. There's no cuts. That you know, they really. I mean, when you close a senior center, you affect the elderly who are very vulnerable. You close a library, you get people who can't really afford to have their own library. It is the people's university. And, you know, these kind of things, preventive services in the health department, discontinuing vaccinations, he said, oh, they're available everywhere. But, you know, there are people in this community that can't afford them. Maybe that might be the only place that they could get them. I'm not sure. Because the fact is, listen, the startling statistic remains that more than 22% of the people in this city have a household, not an individual income, household income below $15,000 a year. So, you know, things like this don't seem, you know, you can be cavalier about this and say, well, you know, the hell with the poor people, you know, let them eat cake. And
Okay,
you know,
Marie Antoinette.
but yeah, exactly. But the thing is, as I get, we have a pattern here. We have a pattern of number one, only cutting from the services and from the bottom of the spectrum, never taking any money away from the people who have the most, and affecting the services that the people who are low income really flag, because there are not too many cuts.
And you know, the thing that I brought up, you know, number one, we're gonna lose a full-time librarians moving to the main branch. Okay, they said it was seriously underutilized, as you said. 3,900 books were checked out last year. But you know what? There are people that don't use it for books. They go in and use the computers for research. They go in to sit down and read while they're there. And that's 86,000 total between the two of them. The South Main Street closing was, again, based upon a lot of the costs. But they didn't talk about the fact that they invested $100,000 on remodeling that Flint library. You know, so with a savings of $36,300 from that closing, it's not a closing, it's actually a loss of $63,700. But they don't talk about that because that would throw off their numbers.
Yeah, and what they also don't talk about is I'm looking at $86,300 for those two. Yet, don't we have one of Mr. Nunes' relatives with a job with about 80 grand?
Yeah, something like that.
And Aya Capone's relative for about
Right.
80 grand.
Yeah, I believe so.
And all these people that were, when we hired a treasurer and gave him a pay raise, which we would assume would mean he was going to do all the work, now, and they ended up with a whole bunch of people around there, which he defends. Do you know how much work the treasurer has? Well, apparently, if he got a simple budget, he wouldn't have a lot of work. But the problem is that I think it's made complicated intentionally. But this is what bothers me. When I look at these numbers and I look at the salaries that are attached to some of these crony jobs that have been given out, this truly, truly bothers me. So then we get to the planning director, reorganization, planning department, $30,500, and that was, let me check my
layoff.
notes.
That was a layoff.
Let me check my notes. That was one position layoff.
Yep.
So we actually did get a layoff there,
Yep.
so one position. And collector's office reorg, that was another job. It says one position, but that, I believe she said that person was transferred to another department. It
Correct,
was not a
'cause they-
layoff.
right.
That's what I got in my notes.
Yep.
And then the law department reorg, that's one position. That's one attorney that didn't get hired, but, you know, I'm not holding my breath. I think if he gets reelected, there'll be another lawyer in there.
Yeah,
I don't think that
89,000.
position is 89,000. And then we go to the elimination of the veterans/health driver consolidation. They consolidated the driver. So, okay, that's probably all right because they probably don't have enough work on one or the other. Probably one driver can handle both. So, but that was a huge savings of $30,000. And let me get back to my.
Automating the government telephone center.
Oh, yeah.
That got rid of 2 positions, and they basically were backfilled, so they went into other positions in city
They went
government.
into other positions, so we didn't lose anybody.
Right,
We
and
eliminated
that's
the human touch.
now it's manned by volunteers and senior workers that are funded under federal money under the CFC senior program. Telephone and cell phone savings. That was because they got rid of the phones nobody was using and the phone lines nobody was using, but we were still paying for them.
Well, yeah, that's right. So there we go. There's our great efficiency. Our financial team had $36,000 worth of cell phones that we weren't using.
Right.
Kind of like the accounts that were dormant for 25 years that nobody ever looked
Right.
at either. So
And the department had salary reductions. The top of the line. The assessor and the planning director were all hired at $11,000 less than the previous position. So that's $22,000 savings.
They were both hired at $11,000 less, which give them time. In the next budget, they'll have a pay raise.
How many stipends are they getting? I want to know.
Yeah, and how many stipends? And also, I guarantee you, in the next budget, if Sam Sutter is mayor, both of these positions will have pay raises in excess of $11,000.
Right. Privatization of the police department custodians, which takes effect today when they're watching, which is Wednesday. $75,000 savings after the expenses of hiring the private company. Library custodians positions were eliminated.
Yep.
There's $40,000.
$40,000.
Okay. We already talked about the crossing guard. Reassignment of the fire district chief aides to stations. Savings of $250,000 in overtime, Chip.
All right. Okay. We're going to need a whole program on this.
Well,
one
we
because-
only have about 6 minutes left, so.
Yeah, we're going to have to do 2 programs on this list because it's pretty long. But that is, I think, a very inflated figure. I don't know how they figured it. She tried to explain it to me, but what do I know? I only ran the overtime for 24 years in the fire department, and as a chief, had to give out the overtime. So, as I said, there's ways to compute things, and figures don't lie, but liars can figure. $250,000 is 25% of the budget that they had. So 8 people going into a pool of 101 had a 25% effect. Those numbers just don't work. Because that's not the way it does work. And number one, even if they did, which they don't save, the elimination of the district chief's aides was horrible. And I mentioned to her, and you were there, CJ, that I gave the mayor 2 studies on aides that said that, number one, the only reason they were ever eliminated was because of political reasons, and it was foolish because those positions are one of the most important in the fire service, and many progressive departments are reinstituting those things. I gave him 2 studies, and I guess he used them for when they ran out of toilet paper to save money. I don't know. But, so we're going to leave that one, because I'm going to take a whole bunch of time when I get into these figures and see how they were computed, because I'm just... Now we've got privatization of child development pension savings.
Right. They're not paying $300,000 into the pension system anymore because they've given that over to People Incorporated or somebody to handle. So that was it. But here's the one you love, Chip. Here's the one you love.
Yeah,
the GIC Health Insurance Alternative Savings, $8 million. And we know where that came from. Shifting it to the
employees, but
the retirees.
And the retirees, and the number still doesn't jive, because if you look at the number, and you were there.
I was there.
And I'm still confused, because I asked her about, I don't know, numerous questions on this issue, and I still am not clear about the answer I got, because she said it's $8 million. I said, but you said over the last 17 months, but is that the total savings of, she said yes, no, indifferent, I don't know. And then she said, but your figure was 12.1 million. And I said, no, that wasn't my figure. That was the figure that you reported to Boston.
Right.
That wasn't my figure. That was, and I didn't get an answer to that. And so, as I said, these numbers I trust about as much as the budget, because $8 million, number one, is either too low, and they're hiding, and they're saving another $2 million. They're up to $15 million. So they're either hiding $7 million somewhere, or this isn't an accurate figure, and it's an inflated figure. So it's either short and they're hiding money, and if it's for a particular period and window, it may be under. So, I mean, here's another one that we really got to dig into, and I will dig into this one.
Oh, I know you will.
This is a big money item. We're talking $8 million here, and we're going to, we'll be digging into this, and we'll be giving you some answers.
And they saved $28,000 on a school bond that they ended up refinancing. So I'm not even going to get into that. Let's move on to the 21, which was the electric aggregation resident savings, estimated at $120 a year. That's not a savings to the city. That's a saving to the residents. And the
Yeah, but who cares, CJ? We'll throw it in so we can make the number higher.
That's right.
That's
but,
right. Even
but the
though
funny thing is,
not their money.
Right, and as I pointed out, it hasn't even been approved by the state yet.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, true. and what is
and here's another savings. They received $7,600,000 in grants, and she says that's low, but that's a savings. I don't think so. That's revenue. And then they have some other things like one-time savings for Shea legal settlement, which came from the CSO project.
We actually made it through the 22 that came up to 21 million. So let's do some quick math. Grants aren't really savings. Somebody gave you a gift. That's almost.
That's 14 million. That's $14 million. You're dropping down to now.
All right, and then $4 million for the electric aggregate.
There's $10 million.
Now we're down to 10. The $8 million for the health insurance,
which
may or not be. So let's give them half.
Okay.
So now we're down to about what? $6 million. And so we're working from a $6 million figure. And if we go through this list, we'll probably get it down to where they saved about $1.50. But we're going to do that on another show.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because again, we went into they went into the Shea legal settlement fund. But hey, we're out of time as usual. So, thanks for watching, and we'll see you Friday.